Hey guys, I see you chatting it up about tuning dynamic filters. I was actually just working on this a little bit tonight with the guys for this two-stage dynamic notch build, this teal copper. We're getting that ready to put it in a PR. I guess Ken already put it in a PR. Anyways, I guess the first part that I would do is go to tiny.cc/filtercalc, download this spreadsheet. There's one that's that doesn't have the teal copper name in it. That's the previous one. That has the it depends where you're at. If you're running the teal copper code, then yeah, you'd want to get this one. If you're running one of the master builds that doesn't have the two-stage dynamic notch, then just get the previous one. It'd be Betaflight 4.0. It just doesn't have the teal copper in front of it. What I'm going to talk about is the gyro low-pass filters and how to quote tune them. Ideally, I think what's probably in there is 99% probably good to go, but some of our issue is we really need to have default quad setups like a 2-inch, a 3-inch, a 5-inch, a 7-inch, and we don't have those in Betaflight because it does vary for these different, it's such a broad spectrum anymore. But for a 5-inch, this is what the defaults are, is probably pretty good. But if you do want to look at it, so you got to choose how far you want to go down the rabbit hole. Like I hear a lot of I gotta tune it. It's like, well, you don't have to tune anything. You can just fly the defaults. It's like, well, it's not optimized. Well, then maybe you have to look at it. I don't know what to tell you. It's hard to make defaults that are optimized for every quadcopter and of all the class sizes. I'd love to see some presets. But anyways, what you'd have to do is you'd have to do a log of a really hard flight or a really good flight on whatever, your 2-inch, your 5-inch, your 7-inch, whatever you got. Then run it through Plasma-Tree. This is what I would do at least. And then you're looking at this throttle band to see where your noise ramps up. So this is percent throttle, right? So 0% throttle up to 100% throttle. And then you can see as you're going up in throttle, the noise moves up in hertz value here. And what we're trying to do is just kind of get a general sense like, okay, it looks like the noise generally starts at a little bit, if 100 hertz is here, it's, probably like 120, right? 130. And then it goes up to, this is 500 hertz. So say it's, it's not 500, but say it's like 475 or something like that at 100% throttle. So that's kind of, and it starts at around, 20%, maybe you could say 10%. 10-20%. So you're just kind of trying to get some sort of idea where that's at. And the reason being is because back on the sheet here, you want to enter that in. I was assuming it starts around 14%, 120 hertz, goes up to 5, and I put 500 hertz. Really, I could probably say 475 here. And what all that does is it allows this sheet to follow something when you're ramping up your throttle. You can see here's that peak. So what's going on here is I increase throttle, you can see that peak going up, and then you can start to see some of your filters over here and how they're following that. So how do you quote tune this? Well, my recommendation is that you have your if you're on teal nickel, you would have gyro low pass 2 off because that's the point of the two dynamic notches. In series there, they really replaced this, and why are we going that direction? And it's pretty simple. At this value, 300 hertz, it's static first of all, and it's 0.5 latency, where this approach is 0.2 latency, so it's lower latency. In addition, the dynamic notches have far superior cut versus just a low pass filter. That's why. So anyways, if you're teal nickel, you would have gyro low pass 2 off. That is the default. If you're on one of the master builds as of today, gyro low pass 2 would be on. 350 is probably a good value there. Then you would have your dynamic notch. Just leave the defaults. And on your gyro low pass 1, probably the defaults are good. What I look for is I want this cutoff to stay prior to the noise peak. See how it's kind of following the noise peak, but it's staying before it. So once you have that stuff entered in, you can kind of ramp up your throttle and say, hey, is that gyro low pass 1 kind of following it well based on what these settings are in here, 150 and 450. That's what you're using that for. And yes, the gyro low pass 1 goes up and passes gyro low pass 2. So at this point, this this stays kind of static. In reality, we're probably moving away from that altogether. I think what's going to happen is with this iteration, you would set this up at like 750 or 700, and that would be only if you're doing like a 32K kind of a thing. So this would be a double attenuation way up there, higher in the spectrum. But so anyways, so that's what you're looking for on the gyro low pass 1 for the dynamic. And then you can just kind of go down. I generally hover between 20 and 30%. So I'm looking at there. Anything lower than that, I'm kind of coming out of the sky. So you can see I'm still prior to that peak noise. After I get down to here, I'm still prior to it. But then, at 10% throttle, theoretically, the peak goes below my low pass, but I'm never at 10% throttle. I'm either at 20 or 30, or I'm at 0, because I'm just falling out of the sky doing a move or something. So that's that one. Now I like this at gyro low pass 1 at the default of a single pole or a PT1 filter, single pole low pass filter. The D term, the default is both are biquad. And I believe the default is 200, and I think this is 120. And then this goes up to 200 as well. I believe that's the default. That's pretty good. If your noise is attenuated fairly well, I would probably bring that up. I would leave this at 200, leave that at 120, but I would bring this one up to 230. Now, why do I say that? So what you can look at is in your back to this plot here, you can kind of get a sense of where these peaks are. So this peak here is, and you can use a black box explorer, you can hit the spectrograph and see where this peak is. My motor band is between here and here. This is at full throttle. This is kind of cruising forward. So looking at it in Black Box Explorer, you can kind of try to thread the needle here, and you can see it over here as well. See, that's that peak here, and then this is the other peak here where it's really yellow, and it's really yellow here. That's both the peaks. So this is at around 230. So I want to keep the, switch back to here. Yeah, I want to keep that just below that first peak. And it's a biquad filter, and then I want to have this one transition up from 120 to 200. So as I'm at, and what I normally look at is around 50% throttle. So my testing, when I'm doing like a real hard 180 turn, my throttle percentage usually is around 70 to 80% throttle when I'm really pushing through the prop wash. And however, when the prop wash first starts, you can see my throttle ramping up in Black Box Explorer, and it's just my flying style, and it's just above 50%, like between 50 and 60% with that first inkling of it. So I usually set this at 50%, and then I examine what my latency is here, and you can see how in teal nickel we're getting down pretty low. We're getting down into the threes, because in reality, there's a couple different settings here. This is going up to 150, 300. That there, we're on the Q of 5. That one there. I guess that's about it. So you can see at 50%, we're at 4.0 latency for. All in, it's 1.8 on the gyro, and then 2.4 on the D term, some additional latency because of the D term filtering. So we're around a 4.0. And as I go up to like 60-70%, now we're hitting 3.8 high threes, and that's pretty good. So just a sense of numbers, normally with Betaflight filtering, we were normally in the high fours, possibly in the fives, like for latency. And now we're looking more like the high threes, low fours. So we're trimming off a bunch, and the filtering's not worse. It's not like, oh, we're letting more noise through. We're letting the same amount of noise through or less. So that's the trick. It's making the filters better, so less noise goes through, and then say, okay, well, now that less noise goes through, I want to raise everything up, so I kind of get a net wash of how much noise. It's not like we're over filtering the gyro. We're kind of filtering it better. Then there's less noise that comes through. It's like, okay, now that we have less noise, let's move everything up so we have the same amount of noise coming through. It's just less latency. So we're trying to keep that baseline of the amount of noise coming through. So that's what I do. That's what I look at on my rig. If you don't want to go into that, then don't. Then just find the defaults. I think the defaults are for teal nickel. And I'm pretty sure these are that. I think this is set to 200. And then they have this set to bi-quad, which I'm, more tests to be done on that. I'm not loving bi-quad there. And the reason I'm not is because if you set this, from PT1, so look at this. This is the attenuation graph. So I'm really interested in noise between below 500 hertz, right? That's where I get my biggest spikes. This is where my motor bands are. I don't have any noise up here because it's I'm running the 8K, and the digital low pass filter internal to the gyro is at 250 right here. I don't have it plotted because this is just software filtering, and that's really crushing any noise above 500 hertz. So anyways, notice when I set this to PT1, watch this end of this graph right here versus this graph right here. When I change that to bi-quad, notice how the end changes a lot, right? That really moves down a lot. But this graph in here, that doesn't really change that much, right? You can see I would say it's kind of not changing at all. The reasoning is because this filter is so high. This at 60% throttle, the cutoff for this thing is up at 361 hertz. So it's just not doing, the cutoff is all the way up here, right? So it's not going to really change anything back here all that much. Secondarily, but look at the latency here. So if I change that from PT1 to bi-quad, I go up by 0.2. So it's not much, 0.2. It all adds up. It's the sum of the parts. So I kind of would rather have that to PT1 personally, and I set this down to like 120. And now it's 0.4 or 0.5, right? And that's kind of what I've been experimenting with. I'm gonna try this is a CTZ thing to set this as bi-quad and have it up, have this up, so essentially sets it to bi-quad and then moves the filter up higher to offset the latency. But I don't know. I gotta try both, see what produces the least amount of prop wash and best filtering. So that's kind of my intimate thoughts on it. I get into the weeds and the details and stuff again. If you're not into that, then just don't worry about this stuff and just follow the defaults. What we're trying to do too is really make sure the defaults are best. But the trick is everybody that's really working the filters is really doing it on a 5-inch quad. So when you get these well, that's not true. George has a GVH law or whatnot. He has a micro. I think he's running like a 2-inch or a 3-inch, and his noise gets up to like 800 hertz. So I'm gonna pick his brain once this all gets to a stable release of some default settings that people can import for like micros. I don't think anybody's doing 6 inches or 7 inches. So it's, the filtering will be able to do it. It's just what are the best defaults for the larger quad. I wish, again, Betaflight had something like iNav where you can tell it, or Flight 1 where you can tell it which kind of quad, and it can just give you some baseline defaults. Because honestly, I think that would be a huge. I think people would just only ever fly the defaults then. But anyways, hope this helped.